This podcast is sponsored by Dis-Chem Living Fit, with a wide range of health products and supplements tailored to your needs. Whatever your needs are, whatever stage in your health and fitness journey you're in, Dis-Chem Living Fit has the products for you. Back to the show. Mr. Mark Wolff, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jesse, for having me again.
You didn't bring any pancakes?
Not today, no. Sundays they finished.
Okay. And how often do you do those pancakes?
Every Sunday. It's become
I'm going to pull up a photo. I'm going to pull up a photo for those people that haven't seen them, what those pancakes look like. They're incredible.
Yeah, I just I try and be a little bit creative and make changes every week. Surprise my wife with a different with a different recipe. But you know what? I think when you train hard, we always say you got to eat hard, but you've also got to enjoy what you're eating. And pancakes, whether they're pancakes, waffles, whatever. I mean, I love them, but I try and make them healthy.
But they are, they obviously all have the ingredients from like using the whey protein, using oats. So they're all relatively healthy ingredients put together. Obviously, the calories might be higher, but you've worked towards deserving those calories. But they're not, added sugar and all of that.
No, look, those pancake stacks I make are probably, with a sauce, probably between 550 to 750 calories. So it's not excessive. Those pancakes contain anywhere between, I'd say, like 55 to 75 grams of protein in a stack. So that's a lot of protein. But generally on a Sunday, we wake up later and we train later. So you could call it a bit of a longer intermittent fasting period. And I try and increase the protein intake to just try and, make up for that loss in the morning. But yeah, they're awesome.
Well, they look great. So in terms of fasting and doing fasted sessions, that's something I want to talk to you about and also, glean some knowledge from you as much as possible. Because I recently have been trying to push the duration and distance that I would do in a fasted state. So let's say usually I would do like 10Ks fasted. Anything over, let's say, an hour of exercise, I would maybe eat before. Whereas now recently I've been trying to do like half marathons, 15K. Like during the week, I would try to do like 15Ks fasted. Obviously, to try increase and improve fat oxidation is fat adaptation, eh?
Yeah.
So at what point is it counterintuitive in terms of wasting away muscle? Obviously, it's person dependent.
Yeah, look, I think, the way I see it is that there's two sides to exercise. The one is aerobic efficiency. And if you are in an aerobic zone and you're exercising in an aerobic zone, whatever that duration is for, you are tapping into your fat fuel tank, which means that you would want to take advantage of that and oxidize as much fat as you can during that exercise session. But the minute you go closer to threshold or over threshold, and you're starting to push yourself into what we call the glycolytic zone, then you do need to take in carbohydrates to be able to support that level of exercise. And it's not just to help hit those numbers. It's also because when you do push those paces or those efforts, you're actually going to also need carbohydrate consumption in order to be able to also help and aid the recovery process. Obviously we know that when you take in protein post-exercise, you don't just take it on its own. You take it with a carbohydrate. It helps maximize the uptake as well. You also want to stabilize blood sugar, and you also want to replenish glycogen. And when you gain glycolytic, you are depleting glycogen. So I believe in periodizing your carbohydrate intake in order to be able to become, well, I call it speaking both languages. The language of being able to oxidize carbohydrates at a very efficient rate, which is the carbohydrate language, and then also being able to oxidize fat at a very efficient rate, which is the fat language. And you'll find that most elite athletes are very efficient at both. They'll go low carb or no carb when it's required to become more fat efficient at maybe high levels of intensity during exercise. That will give them a little bit of a percentage advantage. It's not like a huge percentage, but when they have to perform, absolutely they're taking in rocket fuel, which is the carbohydrates.
So we kind of touched on it last time, and there was actually a comment that you commented on the last podcast I had with a cycling athlete. At what point do you say to someone, yes, it's all fine and well doing keto or doing, banting or abstaining from carbs in general, to what point is it going to be a detriment to your exercise and your performance?
So that's a very interesting question, and the science is clear. And I'll send you actually several scientific research studies, all the way from 93 up until quite recently. The one study that was quite interesting was a study which was done on a mixed diet, which is obviously carbohydrate and fat, and then a low-carb or ketogenic diet, as you want to call it. And they weren't actually ketogenic, but they were low-carb. And they took two groups of athletes and they put them into testing, and they found there was no difference in performance between those two groups of athletes. But the interesting thing is, if you dive into the science, into the study, you'll notice that these athletes are only performing at 62 to 64% of VO2 max. So, I mean, that's a moderate effort. So at that state, there was
Would you say that's like zone 2-ish?
No, I mean, it's upper zone 2, maybe moving for some into zone 3. I think it depends on the individual what those thresholds are. And at that particular state, I mean, you're not really going to see a massive difference. So I felt that study was actually quite flawed in comparison of a ketogenic diet or low-carb diet to a mixed or carbohydrate diet. But when you look at the other studies after that, there's one thing that's very clear. After like 6 or 8 weeks of testing on athletes, those athletes that cut carbohydrates and were more in it didn't even have to be in a ketogenic state, but a low-carb state as well, and trying to maximize fat oxidation. And then those athletes that were consuming carbohydrates, you'll find the distinction between the two groups is that those that were on the lower carb or ketogenic diet, they had loss of power over a period of time. So their power numbers dropped, their pace numbers dropped, etc., where the carbohydrate group, they just carried on improving. So if you're looking at an athlete and you're looking at training adaptations and the ability to progress over time, the low-carb group will drop over time, and the higher carbohydrate group will definitely, you'll see performance improvements over time, and they're not going to drop power. In 2013-14, put myself into a keto state. I mean, I was actually properly ketogenic. I would run blood tests on myself like nearly on a daily basis. I had sore fingers from pricking them so often and running bloods. My ketone levels were always they were over 1.5, but they were usually closer even to 3. So I was fully in a state of ketosis, and I trained like that for, I think it was about 18 or 19 months. I could go long distances on water. But if I have a look at my average heart rate in those sessions, I was in an aerobic zone, and obviously I could support myself. But the one thing I did notice was my functional threshold power. So my bike power was down by quite a significant amount over time. My running paces were down as well. I couldn't hit that top end power. And the other thing that I noticed is that because of the volume of training that I was doing, it actually personally, and I'm not saying this is clear cut because things aren't absolute and it's not a science research study, but my immune system took a massive hammering. I used to get sick a lot more often. And when I reintroduced carbohydrates back into my diet after that period of time, I just saw my power numbers climbing significantly higher. I saw my pace numbers climbing significantly higher. And there was a stage where I didn't even touch an antibiotic for 7 years. So my immune system came back. I recovered better. I felt better. And for me, that was a massive difference in how I felt.
Sorry to interrupt, would you say your body fat percentage was different? Maybe it was lower when you're doing the keto, so maybe that's why your immune system... No one can argue the fact that it was maybe body fat that was lowering... A low body fat lowered your immune system.
My body fat's lower on carbs. And maybe that's because I can push harder. I can elevate my metabolic state as well for a lot longer period of time.
You're so in, I think, more of an anabolic state. Your body's going to be more anabolic because it's got more of what it wants. Because obviously with your genetics and with how you've explained everything with performing better with carbs, your body is more alive with carbs and you feel like you can do more. Your body fat's even lower. Your body obviously enjoys those carbs, so it's going to do better and perform better and then burn the fat more effectively.
Yeah, and I also think that I'm not a massive carbohydrate eater, to be honest. I mean, a big carb day for me could be 250 grams. And for some people, a big carb day is 400, 500, 600 grams, depending on the athlete. So, it differs from person to person. I just feel that, and I do periodize my carb intake. So on rest days or easy training days, my carb intake is low. On days where I need to fuel myself for performance or push harder, it's up. And when I work with athletes, I insist that they take carbohydrates. If they're doing track work or functional threshold power work, I want them to fuel those sessions. I want them to take in carbohydrates because I want to see them hit power numbers. You can put an athlete on a track and make him run 400s and give him a certain pace, and it's quite amazing that if they do it fasted, you might find that after the 8th or 9th interval, or even earlier, you'll find that they can't hit those numbers. But give them the fuel, you'll find that they sometimes outperform those numbers and are able to hold that pace for a lot longer, and then they get much better training adaptations.
Would you see benefit? So if we look at it this way, you do fasted sessions to be able to make your body handle things at a fasted state so that when you do introduce those carbs, you can benefit more? Or is it better to train and introduce those carbs so that when you're training, you're always training at a peak level so that your fitness can improve? So is it more beneficial to have carbs and train a bit more than or at a more difficult capacity than what you would have without the carbs? So is it better to try and, okay, while I'm training, I'm not going to be having that many carbs. Let's say, okay, I'm preparing for a 21K. I'm not going to have any carbs throughout, those training sessions, because let's say the training sessions are 10 to 15K, 21Ks sessions. Let's say max 2-hour sessions. Is it better for me to not have any carbs, to when I do have carbs, maybe on race day, my body utilizes those carbs better, or to train with carbs so that my numbers can improve during training?
So that's a very interesting question, and I've got a really good answer for you. So if you lower your carbohydrate intake in your sort of nutrition lifestyle, and your body adapts to utilizing maybe more fat fuel sources, whether it's adipose tissue being converted and free fatty acids and intramuscular triglycerides. So your body adapts, your mitochondria, which are your energy cells, will adapt to utilizing that source of fuel as a source of energy. So if you keep training like that and then on race day you introduce carbohydrates, the problem is that your gut is not trained to be efficient at oxidizing carbohydrates. So this train low, race high doesn't work from a nutritional state. Remember I said there's two languages your body can speak. The one can be the fat language and the other one can be the carbohydrate language. So if your body speaks carbs, and then you go and put a guy into a training session which is fasted, he'll probably fatigue quite early on and he will feel terrible because his body needs the carbohydrates to fuel himself. But at the same token, if somebody's training on utilizing their natural fat fuel as far as the energy system goes to support those levels and efforts of training, when they do introduce carbohydrates, there will be a level of intolerance. So you can put the carbs in your mouth, but how's your body going to be able to process them and utilize them efficiently? And so I do believe in periodizing. I believe in picking sessions where you should fat fuel to become more efficient. But at the same time, if you are gearing for a race, you need to pick race prep sessions from a nutrition point of view, and you need to fuel yourself as you would on race day. So pre-training meal, intra-training fueling, and then obviously seeing how the body feels. And I developed a methodology quite a few years ago, which is called a tipping point method. So there obviously is a cutoff as to how many carbohydrates an athlete could take, per an hour during exercise. Sports nutrition guidelines will say 30 to 60 grams of carbs per an hour. These days, there's guys going 90 grams, even trying to hit that ceiling of 120, which is crazy. I personally actually am up to 112 grams of carbs per an hour. So
how are you getting those in? Solids and liquids. Depends, obviously.
That's a liquid feed, yeah. So look, there's two channels that are utilized in the human body. The one is the fructose channel, and that's got a cutoff of 30 grams per an hour. The second one's the glucose channel. It's got a cutoff of 60 grams per an hour. And then there's a famous study of the 2-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio. So if you combine the two in that proportion, you can get 90 grams of carbohydrates per an hour. And then there's other ways of trying to maximize what we call gastric emptying in the upper bowel, using things like dextrins, for example, to try and even up it a little bit more. So you need what's called a multiple transporter carbohydrate in order to be able to maximize that carbohydrate uptake. But the gut still needs to go through a period of what we call training. It needs to adjust. It needs to be able to speak that language over a period of time. So my suggestion is start with a small amount of carbohydrates. It could be 30 grams an hour, it could be 40 or 50 grams an hour. See how you feel, see that you've got no gastrointestinal distress, that you've got comfort with your digestive system, monitor your energy levels, and if you feel great and you had no gastrointestinal distress, then the next time you do that session, it could be a week or two later and you want to test again, then up the carbohydrate intake, up it by maybe like in increments, so like maybe 5 or 10 grams, test it again. If it works again, up it again. And then until you hit that level of where you feel gastrointestinal distress. In other words, that time that you feel gastrointestinal distress, that's what I call the tipping point. That's your cutoff. And then you've got to go back. You've got to train on the level that you were comfortable at previously. You've got to adapt your stomach to it. And then obviously once you've adapted, then you can try and push that boundary again. And it might not just be a way of just pushing, it might not just be pushing the boundaries. You might need to have some changes in those carbohydrate sources. In other words, you might need to try and find a different carbohydrate mix that's going to work, and so that your bowels can adapt to that and try and maximize that absorption. So there is a bit of science to it, but at the same time, it does take what I call not just training your muscles, but training your gut.
It's like personal trial and error as well. Because I know when I first started, I would eat too much before the event. And then especially with running, because running gets your stomach working, and then you need to go to the bathroom, and you're not going to want to do that, obviously, during a race or whatever. And I've had times where I was suffering the entire, it was my first 15 Ks ever. It was a run out there in the cradle. It was like a cradle cracker. It was my first run ever. I had done some cycling, but cycling is a bit easier because it's not as much impact. So personally, my stomach doesn't get affected as much, or gets the stomach going. So I suffered the entire way. It's a bit crass, but that point where you need the bathroom so bad, you start shivering. I ran the entire race like that because obviously in the cradle, you can't stop. I'm not going to stop on the side of the road. I'll suffer the entire race before I go to the bathroom. But it was terrible, and I knew I'd just eaten a bit too much before. My body wasn't used to, I didn't eat anything during the race because obviously it was 15 Ks, but I still had eaten too much before, and my gut hadn't adapted to that, and it made the race terrible.
Yeah, I've hit the bushes a few times.
Since then I have, but it was my first time, and it was the cradle, and it's open. So, and I didn't want anyone seeing me going to the bathroom.
It's not, yeah. It's not the best situation to be in, and we call it runners trots. I mean, it's unfortunately there are runners that do suffer from irritable bowel. Some are more sensitive than others, and it doesn't just boil down to what you're consuming before and during the training session. It can actually boil down to what you had the night before, the day before. I've seen this with athletes before. It's like their fiber intake is significantly higher. Maybe in the evening before, where they've gone and eaten a massive steak and it's just sitting there the next day, and all of a sudden they go and they do a run. And you're right, it's a high impact sport in cycling. The digestive system is under way more stress. Also, from a heart rate perspective, running does elevate your heart rate a little bit more than cycling generally, especially also because you've got a wind cooling factor during cycling, but not so much during running. And so your body also needs to divert a lot more blood to the surface of the skin to cool the body down and maintain, core body temperature. So it puts the digestive system even under more stress. And when it's under stress, if you've eaten anything badly or you've done something wrong, the impact can be quite harsh.
I've found now that I actually, even if I do like a proper half marathon trail run, I've found it's better for me actually not to eat before. So maybe the night before, I don't go overboard. I don't try carb load a ridiculous amount because I'm never really carb loading in general. So when I'm doing a 21K training race, I'll eat a normal like 2,000 calorie diet the day before if it's training now, and then I'll run and do the 21 fasted. Whereas if it's a race, maybe I have like 3,000 the day before, and then the morning of, I won't have anything, and then maybe after the first hour, first 45 minutes, then maybe have a bar or a goo or whatever, or have a carb drink if it's a trail run and I'm carrying a backpack. So I've found for me it's actually better to, because I've found my stomach can be quite sensitive if I have too much, it's better to go with a slightly more emptier stomach into the race, just for comfortableness comfortability or whatever the word is, so that I can perform, because there's nothing worse than trying to perform with a full stomach or an irritated stomach.
Yeah, I think that's why runners don't eat a lot, is because they are nervous of what's going to happen when they're running. But like I say, if you learn how to train the gut in training, you can learn to adapt and understand what works for you and what doesn't. So carb loading you spoke about, it's a science actually. A lot of people don't understand the science, and there's different methodologies of carb loading. Some is actually depleting glycogen stores completely days before the event. They go very low carb.
Like the bodybuilding style.
Yeah, they go very, very low carb, deplete glycogen, and then all of a sudden, they accelerate that carbohydrate intake as they head towards race day to try and top up their glycogen stores. But if you get the timing wrong, you're in trouble.
Especially someone maybe like myself who has a sensitive stomach, that's probably not the best route to go, to withdraw from it and then suddenly before the event increase it. For me, it's maybe train my stomach to adapt to it instead of taking it away and then quickly adding to it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you've got to look at is, I always tell people, just maintain your standard eating in race week. There's no need to overdo it. I also tell people don't eat a massive meal the night before a race, because a lot of people go and they eat massive amounts of pasta in that. Your energy system gets set up actually on the morning of race day. And if you can maintain a nice balance, an energy balance through the week, you'll be fine. The biggest focus the night before a race is actually sleep. And if you overeat dinner, you're going to battle to sleep, because your digestive system is just wanting to process things. I've seen people even drink large amounts of water before they go to sleep, and they end up running up and down to the toilet. So it's not the best. I truly believe if you've got a big race and you really want to put out performance, then you need to time your meal intake a couple of hours before the race. You've got to understand what the calorie intake is that's going to make you feel comfortable. And then also the consistency of that meal is so vital. So I asked somebody on a Comrades Nutrition Roadshow that I was doing now, what do you eat prior to your race? And the answer was a hamburger, and I nearly fell off my chair. Like, you don't understand, a hamburger is not the right fuel. The right fuel before a race is low fat, low fiber, maximize carbohydrate intake, and a small amount of a nominal amount of protein. Maybe it will help with stability as well. But really, it needs to be easily processed and digested.
So what's being made in your kitchen the night before? If you can give away your secret, what's on the menu?
No, look, the night before a race, for me, it could be something simple like scrambled egg whites on toast. It's nothing hectic, I don't worry about maximizing carbohydrate intake. I want to sleep well. I tell people, if you want to increase your carbohydrate intake slightly the day before a race, then rather do it at lunchtime, and get some of those carbs in if you want. But for like a big race, it depends on the distance of the race and your duration. But if you're looking at Comrades coming around the corner, it's such a massive race. You're out there for so many hours. Most people are not elite athletes, and I don't see a necessity to really top up your glycogen stores by a little bit more calories. Then it's not going to. You're burning off like 600-700 calories an hour on average anyway. Some people more, some people less. But if you top up your total glycogen stores by another 300 calories and you're running 10 hours, it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, for something like Comrades, maybe like the week leading up, as you slowly increase the amount of carbs you're having.
Yeah, and also one of the biggest issues I see with people after their long runs leading into Comrades is, just as an example, is that they're eating a fortune of calories on a daily basis because they're burning off a lot. Some of these runners are burning 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 calories a day, depending. If you look at after their long runs, which is like some of them are 6 hours, 7 hours of running. It's a lot of calorie burn for the day. And what happens is when they go into that taper period, they'll end up eating the same as they were eating during peak volume training. And even though it's a few weeks, you could gain a kilo, you could gain 1.5, 2 kilos, but let's say it's even a kilogram. Then they get to race day and they're actually heavier than what they were at peak weight during training. And everybody thinks that it's not going to impact you, but it does, because if we take running into account and don't take a hectic cadence of like a standard, which is quite good, of 180 or over, but looking at a standard cadence of maybe a sort of a runner that's not at that level, and they're running a cadence of 160, it's 80 steps per minute on a foot. Add 1 kilogram to that, that's 80 kilos. per minute. Add an hour to that, you're 4,800 kilograms, 4.8 tons of force.
Times by
extra.
10.
Times that by 10 hours, it's, what's it? I mean, on the lower end, maybe 30 tons, 50 tons. Is that going to impact your running? Absolutely, it will. Absolutely. It's going to put more forces through the body, probably cause more muscle fatigue. So these are things that I always say is like nutrition plays a very vital role in whatever event you do. And it really does need to be looked at. But going back to like a pre-race meal or pre-training meal, I think it's important to set your energy system up. That when you get to the start of that race, you've already got your energy system at a nice level. Your body's going to utilize what you've consumed in the morning as a source of energy, and then intra-fueling, so you can top that up and you can actually keep fueling as you go along. And you'll see better performance numbers. You'll see the ability to delayed onset of fatigue, ability to extend your performance for a longer period of time before you hit those levels of fatigue, and it does make a difference. But again, it depends on, some athletes are social runners and all they want to do is they want to just enjoy the run from the beginning to end and then go and pizza up afterwards. And so it really depends on what the goal is of the person doing that event.
So you mentioned before we started that you turned 52 this year. So I want to talk about, because also you mentioned your main focus is getting a good amount of sleep the night before a race. How do you manage, being older, your body doesn't recover as much as what it would have when you were younger? How do you manage to perform at such a high level? And what steps do you take to be able to do that, to be able to recover, to be able to perform at such a high level for a 52-year-old? The performance that you're putting out there, it's good for a 25-year-old. So it's not like I'm saying it's good for just a 52-year-old. But how do you, as an older person, what more steps do you take than what I would have to?
Look, it's not easy. It requires a lot of focus. I think one thing is that from a nutrition point of view, it has to relate back to the kind of training that you're doing. At my age, I have to incorporate a lot more strength work than somebody that might be younger. And the reason we have to incorporate a lot more strength work is because of sarcopenia. Muscle does degrade over a period of time, and as you hit your 50s and even 60s, it starts to accelerate. And that's where you actually see endurance athletes pretty much breaking down as they age, because they don't have the ability to maintain or even strengthen and build lean muscle. And that really does make a huge difference. So I do incorporate a lot more strength work. Previously, I might have done strength 2 times a week, sometimes 3. Now it's like 4 or 5 times a week and mixed up. And the reason I split it and do more strength sessions is because I can't hit everything at once, because, again, my muscles take longer to recover. So, when I was a lot younger, I could go into a gym and I could do a heavy strength session, and 48 hours later, I could go back and do that same heavy strength session. Not anymore. So that does require dietary changes. My protein intake is significantly higher than what it was when I was younger. When I was younger, I might have been eating 1.4 up to 1.6 grams of protein per kilo body weight, and in my 40s, maybe closer to 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. I'm not a bodybuilder by any means, but even now, I'm probably consuming around 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight.
Half of that's in the pancakes.
And yeah. But and in order to maximize protein uptake, that you have to periodize your protein intake. You can't take it all at one meal, because the human body can only process protein at certain rates. And on average, you're probably looking at about 9 to 12 grams of protein per an hour. So if you overeat protein in significant amounts, obviously that does get converted into blood glucose, and then the glucose is taken up, not the protein.
So then someone that's maybe doing fasting, let's say they're doing a 16-hour fast, how will they separate? Would they have to have like 6 small amounts of protein? Or, because then they can't have 50 grams of protein this meal, 50 grams the next meal, and then 50 grams for dinner.
So that's my thinking on intermittent fasting is, let's say you do have to take in 150 grams of protein a day. Your body can only process so much. So if you've got an 8-hour window period, how are you going to get 150 grams into that 8-hour window period? You might be able to have a higher protein intake in your first meal, and even if it does get converted into blood glucose, it'll probably be taken up because you've been fasting for so long, so it's not going to really impact you. But you're still limited into how much protein your body can take up. So what I suggest is actually trying to have like 6 meals in an 8-hour period, and really trying to periodize that protein intake to maximize that uptake. But I find that for athletes that are doing intermittent fasting, especially athletes that require much higher levels of protein intake, the body just can't take it in. And so I say to them that pick your days. If you want to intermittent fast, then you need to look at what the lowest level of protein intake is for that particular day. But days when you're really looking at performing in that, I'm like, you don't really need to intermittent fast. And then I hear this theory of macrophages cleaning out the digestive system, etc. And a lot of people don't realize that even if you've been fasting for 8 or 10 hours and you do exercise, macrophages are fired up and performing anyway. So, for athletes are different to sedentary people. A sedentary person when it comes to intermittent fasting, and they're looking at it for weight loss or they're looking at it for health benefits, by all means, But if you want to perform and you want to recover, you can't really fast. You need to be eating the right foods, and you need to be trying to take in the right nutrients in order to be able to support everything from energy to recovery to, just overall health. Although there are reasons in some cases why people would fast, but I guess I would analyze it on a case by case basis and see like what is the reason for it. If somebody says to me, I want to lose weight, I'm like, there's 100 different ways you can lose weight, but we know the bottom line is if you want to lose weight, eat less than you're burning off. That's the science, black and white. There's no debate here. So they restrict their calorie window, they restrict their calorie intake, but then sometimes they overdo it and they don't realize that they're overdoing it.
So in terms of, eating more protein, what other aspects have you maybe had to put more focus on the older you've gotten?
So previously I would actually also fast a lot more before training sessions. So I would do a lot of fasted training. These days I do less fasted training. I fuel my sessions. I find that it actually helps with my recovery process. It also, I find it helps with my immune system function. It just makes me feel a lot better. And it does support me. I do some fast, like this morning I did a fasted training session. It wasn't excessive, but there are days where I won't do a fasted training session. I'll have a little pre-race meal or something before. And
great product, by the way. I enjoy it.
Okay, it actually came from me when I worked with some elite athletes. I used to make them overcook white rice. Like just keep it soaked the night before, add some cinnamon, add some honey, and the next day, if you want it hot, add some hot water into your white rice or add a little bit of protein powder, mix it up and eat it. And then I thought, well, it's quite a mission. Not everybody wants to cook white rice.
Now you got those fabulous little sachets.
So now, I tried to. I had it pre-cooked already and just said mix it with water or milk or whatever you want to do. But that actually works quite well. Something I want to actually speak about on the fasting side, and this is something that's come up a lot, and Dr. Stacey Sims is actually a leading expert in dealing and managing female athletes. And she's got this terminology, which is a female is not a small version of a male, and she's 100% spot on. I mean, the hormonal system of a female is completely different to that of a male. She's pretty against, and the science has come to the forefront in a lot of aspects that women should never fast before training. They should never do intermittent fasting. They need to, because whereas a man, and it's all got to do with hormone levels, but when women get up in the morning, they've got much higher elevated cortisol levels than, say, a man would have. And we know the way to drop down cortisol is to actually take in carbohydrates. And she's a big fan of actually doing that. And again, also post-exercise, the theory is that women have to eat within 45 to 60 minutes post-exercise. They should not.
Now girls are going to think they've got an excuse to go eat a pizza after a training session.
Well, it's not a pizza. Yeah, it has to be. In actual fact, yeah, and one of the science research study that she did is she said, like, if it's strength, then actually a protein meal pre-training would be more beneficial for a female athlete. But obviously, we hear this all the time. I eat the 80-20 rule. 80% is I enjoy and 20% is healthy, or 80% is enjoyable and healthy, and 20% is the junk. And unfortunately, there's no 80-20 when it comes to nutrition. Nutrition is like 99-1. You've really got to. I mean, you come from a competing background. If you look at a stage bodybuilder, I always say those stage competitors, the way they eat and the way they've got to sacrifice themselves, it's way harder than any endurance athlete has to go through from an eating perspective. The sacrifice of those cutting diets is hectic.
I think that's the only thing that's more difficult about bodybuilding than maybe other sports, if you want to call bodybuilding a sport, is the diet aspect. Yes, the other aspects of training and endurance, you need to have a strict diet. But with bodybuilding, it's every single I needs to be dotted, every single T needs to be crossed, and there's no margin for error within there. Whereas with endurance, there's slight margins.
So yes, I mean, obviously, if you're going to chisel yourself, your nutrition has to be 100% spot on. But when it comes to endurance athletes and performing at an elite level, the percentage gains in those athletes that give their nutrition the absolute focus is, you can see that those are the ones that actually perform and outperform. You can all train at that same level. You can all be hard at training, and you can all train in those zones, and you can compete with each other on a physical level. But when it comes to those percentage gains from a nutrition point of view, from a sleep point of view, from a recovery point of view, from lost training days point of view, whether it's lost training days to injury or illness, and very often nutrition does play a role in that. Endurance athletes, we know that, we look at this 6-7 week period where, the training that you do in week one, those sort of fitness changes come across over, it's not instantaneous. It takes many, many weeks before those adaptations take place. And very often somebody that nutrifies themselves a lot better will recover better and adapt a lot better. But at the same time, if you're putting your body under physiological stress, and endurance is severe physiological stress, and you're putting yourself at risk of injury or illness because you're not consuming the appropriate nutrients and the right amount of nutrients, then you land up being susceptible to lost training days, either due to injury or illness. And the minute you lose training days in endurance sport, your fitness over a period of time starts to drop. With strength athletes, it's not the case. You can do strength, you can stop for 3, 4, 5 weeks, go back and do strength, and you bounce back a lot quicker. With endurance athletes,
and you do have a strength background as well, yeah?
Yeah, I came from sort of bodybuilding and into powerlifting, and I used to be 40 kilos heavier than I am now, and then I moved into endurance sport.
I just mentioned that to show you do have a working knowledge of the strength training.
Yeah, over 35 years I've been doing strength work, so it's a long time, and I love it, and it's part and parcel of my training. Even as an endurance athlete, strength is never ever neglected.
And why is that?
Because as you age, you need to maintain lean muscle, and the only way to maintain increased lean muscle is to do strength work. There's no other way. You can't go run and ride or swim and maintain or increase lean. You need hypertrophy. You need to damage those muscle fibers and resynthesize them and let them grow and fortify and strengthen. And it's the only way to do it is, and you've got to lift.
For both young and old, regardless of your age.
When you're young, you get away with it.
But would you encourage a person that wants to be a high-performing runner to lift?
Absolutely. But also functional strength is very important. So, working those functional muscles that you would utilize for that particular sport discipline, whether it's running or swimming or cycling, I think it's important to work those muscles. I mean, if you look at endurance sport, just take your glutes, for example. They are primary functioning muscle when it comes to running and cycling. I don't see many. I mean, I've seen Kenyans doing hip thrusters, like monster weights, and these guys can run. But you don't really see athletes sitting in a gym doing heavy 3 thrusters and working the glutes, etc. But, and there's also a lot of balance and core work that comes into it. And this is something that I was thinking about earlier today, and you understand this, when it comes to any sport, whether you're a strength athlete or an endurance athlete, there's something that we call, in running, we call it running economy, which is, how you run and the form that you're running in. In strength, it's also the form. It's how you lift a weight. You've got to have proper form. If you don't have proper form, and often in the gym I see people doing strength work, and I'm like, I'm surprised you haven't pulled your back out or damaged your shoulders or whatever it is. There was a guy the other day sitting on a leg extension machine, and he was doing it sideways, and it's like not the natural plane of movement for the knee. And I'm thinking it's just strange,
Something's gonna happen to his knees.
Yeah. So it's the same thing with cycling. It's the same thing. So the way I look at it is this: if you build a bridge over a river and there's cars driving up and down over this bridge, and you put 2 or 3 pylons like pillars to support this bridge, and the cars and the traffic keep on increasing over time, and there's more and more traffic, eventually that bridge might collapse because there's only 2 or 3 pillars supporting it. But if you've got like 20 pillars under that bridge, the stress and the load on that bridge is actually dispersed over a much larger area. So if you've got a runner or a cyclist and they are running and cycling and they're utilizing a minimal amount of muscles to perform that activity, imagine you could engage so much more muscle to help perform that activity. You'll find that the stress and the load is actually spread over a larger area. They are able to perform at a much better rate, and they will actually also lengthen that time to fatigue because their muscles are not over-fatiguing. And generally we see, mainly with running, that when somebody does have predominant muscle use and they're not doing any strength or functional strength work or whatever they're doing to try and improve their running economy, we do find that eventually the muscles fatigue, there's referral, eventually there's injury. Whether it's tendon injury or whatever it is, it does land up happening. And so I think that it's like strength is really part and parcel of holistically approaching any sport. I mean, whatever the sport is, whether you're a tennis player, whether you're a rugby player, whether you're a runner, a cyclist, I think it's important. But speaking about form and economy, if you think about it, somebody that squats with very bad form in the gym and somebody that squats with good form in the gym, obviously there's going to be differences in how those people progress over time. Now, if you look at eating, which is nutrition, are you going to perform your nutrition with bad form or with good form? And those that perform it with good form, in other words, they really give it focus and they're taking what you need, are obviously going to also, over a period of time, going to fortify their bodies. But those that don't give it the focus, eventually it will see that it will be detrimental. In the long run, it will definitely put stress on the system, and the system will have to collapse in some way or another. Either injury related, immune system related. I've often seen athletes, for example, under eating protein, and then eventually they'll end up with injury. It's just part and parcel of the game. They're 2 puzzle pieces that just have to fit together seamlessly.
Well, I mean, if you going back to the strength training, if you look at a boxer, they do functional training, they do running, they do swimming, they do their boxing training, like the professionals. Obviously, it's very strength-related boxing, maybe more so strength than talking about like punching power compared to what running is strength-related. But obviously, you still need that strength. And I mean, if you look at those boxers, they do all of it. If you look at sprinters, they do all of it. If you look at, any particular athlete that's like Ronaldo, he does a lot of strength training as well. And he's at the top of his game. So I think people, maybe runners also, or cyclists or whatever, anyone that wants to be as light and functioning properly as possible might look at strength training as a negative because they feel like they're going to get big overnight, which I think everyone that actually goes to the gym wishes was the case, which we all know it's not. But I know personally, looking at myself, and obviously last year was my first proper entire 365 days of doing endurance training. When I went and did my trail runs, having that gym base that I had with, strength training with my legs drastically benefited me when I was climbing those mountains, when I'm doing tons of step-ups, because I would find there would be runners, like let's say it was a flat or a downhill, people would pass me. Then I would see those same people and I'm going past them on the uphills when we're climbing. And I could maybe only accredit that to the strength in my legs that I had from lifting weights. Because I wasn't tired when I was, running downhill or on the flat or whatever, but they just had that, maybe more ability to be able to run, or they weren't pacing themselves well, whatever the case may be. But there were people that were passing me on flats and downhills, but then when it came to the climbs, I was passing them. And I find I enjoy climbs more. I enjoy climbing the hills, doing the hills, just because I feel stronger doing it.
Look, it's absolutely a benefit. I was speaking to a female athlete that did a trail run, a 2-day trail run this last weekend in Paris, and she said to me, she really felt the benefit of the strength work coming out in that trail. She'd been running for years, but her legs felt no pain and no aches, and it does play a major benefit. And you're speaking about boxers. It's a tough sport. It's a tough sport. It requires speed, it requires power, it requires a very high level of fitness, because if you're going to go many rounds, you've got to survive. So holistically, any top coach in this world will approach every single aspect of it. And they have to focus on their diet as well. Absolutely. I mean, not just from a weigh-in point of view, but obviously supporting the training that they're doing. So I think with endurance sport or strength, whether you're an endurance athlete or strength athlete, I think that you do need to look at all the different puzzle pieces that fit around a particular sport, and you've got to find those you've got to give all those puzzle pieces focus. Because ultimately, I mean, what's the goal of an athlete? For me, it's not really standing on the podium. Yes, I'm competitive, and when I do go into a race, which is not very often, I'd like to try and perform at my best, and it just gives me something to train for and strive for. And when people say to me, you don't race a lot, I'm actually in the biggest race of my life. And they say to me, what's that? And it's to live to 100 like a 20-year-old. That's the race. The race is longevity. The race is quality. And I use exercise as a means of improving the quality of my life and making sure that, the last thing you want to do is land up in your 70s or 80s and then you're in and out of hospital for the next 20 or 30 years of your life. It's just not a place you want to be. So exercise should be a means of improving quality of life and creating longevity. But it's not just as simple as I'm only going to run, or I'm going to run in order to justify my beers and my pizza, or I'm going to neglect strength. You really have to look at all those puzzle pieces that fit into that picture.
I think it's maybe just analyzing what exactly you want, and you've obviously analyzed what you want out of life, and you want to live a long, healthy life. So you putting all those puzzle pieces together. The person that doesn't really care about, they just, running socially, then fine, don't try put all the puzzle pieces together, but then also don't expect to do well the same way someone else that puts the puzzle pieces together does.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these runners that they do run and they are more social, and then they like to run more and more and more. What you do see is that they do land up getting injured, and they do land up getting ill, and they go through these roller coaster ride periods. And I think it also plays on people emotionally. You want to exercise, but you can't, or there's an up-down. Funny thing with runners, though, is when they get injured, it's like training just stops. It's like, you can still go do strength. You can go work upper body. You don't have to work, or you can work around the injury, etc. It's actually quite interesting to see that when an endurance athlete gets hit, they don't know what to do.
Yeah, you even go sit on that thing with just your arms at the gym, just do something.
But take a strength athlete if they're injured, and they will find a way to work around that injury. My shoulder's injured, but man, I can still do tricep push downs. I can still go and train legs and core, and there's ways of working around it. So I think it's just quite funny to see that.
In closing, obviously you've been doing these talks and everything about comrades coming up. What is your main maybe tip or takeaway now? Because this will be out in the next 3 days. So let's say it's 10 days before comrades.
So I think we can look at the week leading into Comrades Marathon, because I always like to look at that week. And there's a number of things that I tell people. The first is maximize your sleep, actually. Try and get as much sleep as possible, because sleep does equal performance. Sleep also equals better recovery, and you'll feel better on the day. actually ran some blood tests on quite a few comrades runners post their long runs, and it was quite interesting to see that even though their mind said they're feeling good and they're feeling strong, their bodies were broken. I mean, low red cell counts, low hematocrit levels, low hemoglobin levels, very elevated CK levels. You can actually see a lot of muscle damage in the blood. And it's quite interesting that, you know, all of these things have to fall into place. So you get to race day and your body's not on the back foot, that you're 100% recovered. And sleep does play a very vital role. The second thing to that is obviously nutrition plays a very important role. So you've got to eat cleanly. And when I say to people eat cleanly, I'm not saying like you've got to go and eat like leaves and only vegetables. Eat foods that agree with you. They're not going to impact your digestive system negatively. Foods that you're used to. There's no need to go mad on takeouts and things. Eat wholesome meals, you know, meals that you would normally eat that are clean, and obviously also in the amounts that you should be eating. Don't overeat, don't undereat. Try and maintain an energy balance leading up to race day. You definitely don't want to be eating in a calorie deficit as you're heading towards race day, but you also don't want to be eating in a calorie surplus as you're heading towards race day. So try and maintain a balance. People think I hate alcohol, but you do have to cut alcohol leading into race day. There's a number of reasons for it. I mean, it without a doubt, alcohol prevents muscle protein synthesis. We know that. It doesn't allow muscle to recover. And then again, also, it triggers dehydration in the body. And a dehydrated state is not a great state because you're trying to maximize your hydration status leading into race day. We know that 1 gram of glycogen is bound to 3 grams of water. So, you know, why would you want to be in that situation? I always tell people, save it for after race day. You've trained so many months and so hard, you know, why spoil it? And then, I mean, simple things like, you know, avoiding crowded places, etc., and trying to limit your you know, the thing is you don't want to land up when your immune system is pretty low, catching an illness prior to a race. And comrades, marathon runners' immune systems are generally on the lower end, especially after they've done very, very heavy volume training. And so you can also look at things to help fortify your immune system, you know, taking sort of vitamins and minerals and trying to maximize it as much as possible. So in race week, I think that those are the biggest areas of focus. As you get closer to race day, like 3 days out, I believe in mineral loading. So not drinking just water on its own, but taking in a electrolyte solution, which is more hypertonic, which actually increases your mineral levels and also helps with retaining more water, and putting your hydration status on a really good level, because you want to land up at the start in a hydrated state. It really sets you up well. A lot of athletes land up losing an excessive amount of fluid, you know, due to exercise during the event, and what happens is it does really trigger the onset of fatigue. It can trigger cramping. There's a lot of, everyone thinks it's always the energy system, but the hydration status of an athlete is so vital. So hydrating properly is very key. And then also, I think other things to worry about are just, you know, as you're getting closer to the day, is to try and think about, you need to have your fueling strategy ready for the day. You can't be going there in a guessing game. I stand at expos every year at Comrades, and people come up to me and say, so I'm doing my first Comrades, and so what do you suggest I take?
It's a bit late.
You want to box them. It's like, you know, you've been training so hard, but haven't you given nutrition? So I said, what have you been doing? Oh, no, occasionally I have jelly babies and this and that. So a nutrition strategy needs to be thought out. We spoke about like carbohydrate intake. You need to know how much you need to take per hour, and you need to stick to it on race day. And you also
set reminders on your watch. Those it's relatively easy if you just put 2 seconds of thought into it.
100%. You need to just map it out, and also you shouldn't be also eating from a fueling perspective. You shouldn't be taking in something once an hour. Energy system sees big ups and downs, and you don't want to have massive peaks and troughs. It's better to consume what I call between the 20-40 window. So look at 30 minutes on average. You should be consuming something that will help stabilize your energy levels a lot better.
Yeah, because I think the moment you feel like you need something, it's almost too late.
Yeah, so you can always shorten your feed or lengthen your feed, but if it's too long, you're in trouble. And then the other thing I say to many athletes is, don't create a soup. So, you know, you get these guys that come and they say, yeah, so I took 2 gels at the start line, I took a nougat bar, my wife gave me a peanut butter sandwich, I had some biltong, I had some crisps, and then I went and had potatoes and bananas. And I'm like, most people won't eat that nonsense in a whole day, and here you're doing it while your body is under stress and you're running. So, you know, like look at 1 or 2 products, maximum 3, but like try and keep it as simple and clean as possible and just stick to it. You know, a carb is a carb, a protein is a protein. It's not going to make a difference really in what form it is, as long as you enjoy it and you're able to consume it on a regular basis throughout the event. And yeah, so those are the key points. Lastly, on race day, do not skip your pre-race meal. Absolutely, you've got to take in a pre-race meal, whatever that is. Keep it low fiber. It can be, you know, whether you have white bread as opposed to whole wheat bread, because it's obviously low in fiber. People say to me, what meals? I'm saying, well, you can have a porridge. Some people like pap, some people like sorghum, some people like oats. In my case, it's more the white rice pudding. I don't advocate massive amounts of meat. We know that protein only processes it's over a certain period of time. So I tell athletes, well, you can go and have your steak for breakfast, but understand by the time you get to poly shorts and beyond, it's still sitting in your stomach.
Is it like 48 hours for red meat usually?
Look, it depends on the volume of meat that you've had, and it depends on how it's broken down. But yeah, look, a lean protein, like obviously like a fish or a chicken, is going to break down a bit more easily. I once had a guy that it was quite an interesting story. I think I should share this because he was actually doing a lot of strength work, but there was a guy in one of the Virgin Active gyms who was really overweight and trying to lose weight. He was like 170, 180 kgs and like really, really overweight, even though he was like quite tall. And I saw him sitting in the change room the one day, and I said to him, he had like a Dis-Chem pharmacy bag on the bench. He doesn't even put it in the locker, it's so big, but he leaves it there. Everyone is scared of him because he's so big, and he just leaves it on the bench. And he's pulling out these tubs of powders, and he's like, oh, I trained hard. And I look at the powder, I'm thinking, okay, it's like quite a bit of carbs in here and a bit of protein, but it's a high carb recovery shake. And so I said,
not ideal for his goals.
Yeah, well, not ideal, but he said he trained hard and he earned it. So I said, well, I just happen to have a blood testing kit in my locker. It just so happened to be there. So I said to him, can I do a blood test on you quickly? So he says, really, like right here now? It says, like, what do you mean? I said, no, it's just a finger prick test. I want to see something. So I wanted to see if he was in a fat burning state or not. And his blood sugar was very elevated, very elevated. And I said to him, what did you eat before you came to gym? He said, nothing. My last meal was last night, like at 8 o'clock. And I said, but what did you eat for dinner? And he said, no. He says, Mark, I had a massive steak, like a really bad. It was only steak and salad, but I had a massive steak. So what had happened was he had overeaten that piece of meat, and the next day he came to gym, his blood sugar was elevated. And even after he had done like an hour of training, his blood sugar was still elevated. So I said, put those tubs back in your bag. So he looks at me, he goes, now what? I said, up to the treadmill, 45 minutes, hit intervals, go, sprints, 20 seconds on, 1 minute off, walk, run. Came back down, ran another test. I said, now you're burning fat. I said, but now you can have like a small portion. So yeah, look, meat is, it's one of those things that for some people they enjoy it and it sits well with them. But if you're thinking of it as utilizing it as a source of energy, it's extremely inefficient. It's not going to be a source of energy. Carbohydrates are the quickest accessible source of energy, and that really is the key. You can have a bit of protein with it, but I think that just helps stabilize blood sugar a lot better. Also makes you leaves you feeling a little bit fuller for a little bit longer, and that's quite important. And lastly, when it comes to these big endurance events, is people look at like stimulants like caffeine, for example. And it's quite important to mention that caffeine reaches peak concentration levels over a 60-minute period. So if you take caffeine and you hit that peak, there's going to be a downer. So it means you've got to keep taking the caffeine. So I often advocate to athletes, if you're going to consume caffeine during an event, time the intake, but make sure once you've taken it, in under an hour, you've got to keep topping up on that caffeine so that you keep that sort of stimulus on that stable level and it doesn't keep dropping off.
Because you guys have that caffeine gel thingy.
Yeah, so I
normally do that like in the last like 45 minutes, hour bit of my race when I'm like really fatigued. And like for UTCT, it was amazing because I had 2 of them. In the last 2 hours, after being on the road and running in the trails for 8 hours, then I took one, and then like 45 minutes, like when I had like 10 Ks left, then I took another one. And it was perfect timing because I didn't take it right at the start, and then didn't
You
have
crossed
any,
the finish line
didn't
before
have
the
any
downer.
to take, yeah.
Look, we've got caffeine shots. I think that, a lot of companies do caffeine. You get caffeine tablets and you get capsules, etc. The important thing to understand is that with caffeine, it has got a limited sort of impact, time-based.
Well, anyone that drinks coffee, I think, knows that.
Yeah, and also the problem with coffee is you don't know how much caffeine is actually in a cup of coffee. People tell me my coffee is strong, but it doesn't mean. It could be the blend. It could be the roast. It doesn't mean that there's, you might drink like 2 espressos and you think, well, I got my 60 or 100 milligrams of caffeine in, but it's not the case. And caffeine should be measured in a way. The benefit of caffeine is it does help with mental focus, and it actually can help lower the rate of perceived effort. So often you see, it's quite interesting. We've analyzed athletes that after the ingestion of caffeine, we've seen their heart rate actually drop for a period of time. And it's quite interesting to see that. We've done that testing with a lot of athletes. And it's an interesting thing. It's very interesting to see. I'm actually going to, I want to run a clinical research study after Comrades I want to see what the maximum sort of carbohydrate uptake can be. I'm looking at certain blends, but I want to see what that maximum carbohydrate uptake can be for athletes. And that's, for me, is an interesting study at the moment. So, again, you've got to find what works for you, and you've got to do what's beneficial for you. But when you're putting yourself into endurance, don't neglect the nutrition, don't neglect your fueling, and that means before, during, and after. Obviously, after from a recovery perspective, and I think look at things holistically, from a health perspective, because all these aspects like strength, functional strength, and the nutrition and the sleep, it's all going to impact you in a positive way. You've got to admit, a lot of people out there have got full-time jobs, and they sometimes train like professional athletes, and they've got families, and they're like stretching this elastic band for so long, and eventually it's got to snap. There's a point where it's going to snap.
Just try avoid that snap. That's why exactly. I think that's why you just have to, if you want to be firing at full tilt for every single aspect of your life, everything needs to be perfect.
Look, it's impossible to be perfect and maintain perfection. I'm of the belief that in life there's things you can control and there's things that you cannot control. I can't control a car driving down the road and shooting through a red traffic light. It's not in my control. What I can control is to be more observant and look out for these things. When it comes to health and exercise, things that I can control is I can go for medicals and check my bloods very regularly and make sure that I have a deep understanding of what's going on with inside my body. Because if there is something out, then I can make a controlled decision to fix that issue. I like what I call the traffic light system. If things are green, I'm happy. If they're orange, they need to go back to green. If they're orange, they cannot go to red. If they're red, you've got to stop and fix. But we can control we can control our health decisions. And obviously you need to be very intuitive of that. In other words, like regular medicals and checkups, etc., working with a physician and making sure you understand what's going on. We can control what we put into our mouths. Every single day we can control how we eat, how we drink. And we know that if you put something in your mouth that's detrimental to you, you must know there's going to be an impact on your body in a negative way. But we can put foods in our mouth that are only beneficial. We can put drinks in our mouth that are only beneficial. But we've got control of that situation. We can control the time we go to sleep, the time we wake up. There's a lot of factors. We can also control if we're going to exercise or if we're not going to exercise. And I think if you look at the factors that you can control, ultimately it's risk management. And I personally believe that that's what will see people being healthier for longer in life, if they do look at those areas that they control and control them. Some of us are control freaks. We want to control more, and some don't care. I lost my health when I was very young. I've told you the story, and when you get a wake-up call like that, you realize that you don't want to be in a position that you can't control things, because when you don't have your health, then you don't have hope, and really that's the truth of the matter. So I think it's important. I like to stress, like, look at these different areas. And I'm not saying you have to be 100% control freak, but, you know, I think I wouldn't even call it in moderation, but I think higher than moderation, try and control these factors, and you'll smile for it later in life, without a doubt.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. You'll be the first guest I ever have on to live to 100 and still be able to perform at a high level. So
if I'm 100 years old, you will have me on the show again.
If you're 100, I'll probably be 70 something. So maybe I'm still doing a podcast at 70.
Well, even if you're not, we'll make it happen.
We'll make it happen. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
And thanks, guys, for listening. Cheers. This podcast is sponsored by Dis-Chem Living Fit, with a wide range of health products and supplements tailored to your needs. Whatever your needs are, whatever stage in your health and fitness journey you're in, Dis-Chem Living Fit has the products